What if the system wasn't broken, but designed to protect the guilty? What if those meant to uphold the law were the very ones destroying it? In a town where corruption runs deeper than blood, one woman risks everything to expose the truth only to realize she's up against forces far bigger than she ever imagined. Stay with us until the end, because this story will shock you, enrage you, and make you question everything. Where are you watching from today? Tell us in the comments. And if you love powerful stories of justice, subscribe to Inspiring Stories Told, because the fight isn't over yet. Sable Creek, Mississippi, was not a town where justice lived. It was a place where power ruled, and that power belonged to the men in crisp uniforms and black robes, men who had decided long ago who belonged and who never would. It was a town where the police weren't protectors but predators, and the courthouse wasn't a beacon of law. It was a weapon, sharpened and used against people who looked like Naomi Carter. Naomi had been in Sable Creek for 6 months now, working as an unassuming court records assistant. To the people who barely noticed her, she was just another nobody, an overqualified black woman lucky to have a job in their system. And that was exactly how she needed them to see her. Invisible, insignificant, nothing more than a woman who filed papers and fetched coffee. But every time she flipped through an old case, every time she noticed missing evidence, altered police reports, or accidental file deletions, she was piecing together the rot that festered beneath the town's surface. The courthouse reeked of quiet corruption. Naomi had seen it in the forced smiles of public defenders who knew their clients never stood a chance. She heard it in the hollow apologies of prosecutors who had long since accepted the game. She felt it in the way every black defendant who walked through those courtroom doors knew the verdict before the trial even began. And then there were the officers, the same ones who laughed in break rooms about keeping the peace, when all they did was keep their boots pressed against the necks of anyone who dared to question them. Naomi had learned early that her presence in the courthouse wasn't welcomed. It wasn't just the way the officers looked at her, like she was a stain on their pristine institution. It was the way they spoke to her, the way they made sure she understood that she didn't belong. Affirmative action at its finest. Officer Caleb Dawson sneered one afternoon, leaning against her desk as she sorted files. Guess they needed a little color in the office. The other officers in the room chuckled, nodding in approval. Naomi didn't flinch. She had been trained for this. She had expected this. But expecting it didn't make it any easier. Another time, Judge Richard Whitmore, the highest authority in Sable Creek's courthouse, accidentally knocked a stack of case files out of her hands, watching as she bent to pick them up. "You should be more careful, sweetheart," he said smoothly, offering her nothing but a condescending smile. Then there were the more physical reminders. One morning, as Naomi walked toward the filing room, a clerk carrying a fresh cup of coffee turned a sharp corner and collided with her. The scalding liquid soaked through her blouse, burning her skin. "Oh, oops," the woman said, laughing as Naomi winced. "Maybe you should pay more attention, hon." There was no apology, no offer to help, just laughter. Naomi clenched her fists, forcing a tight smile. She wanted to scream, wanted to throw the empty cup back at the woman, but she swallowed the anger down. She couldn't afford to break character. Not yet. But the worst was Sheriff Walter Grayson, the man who ran Sable Creek's police department with an iron grip, the man who had built his career on keeping people like her in check. Naomi had learned to avoid his gaze when he walked through the courthouse halls, but that day she wasn't quick enough. He stopped beside her as she filed away documents, towering over her. "You sure do keep yourself busy, don't you?" he mused. Naomi forced herself to stay calm. "Just doing my job, Sheriff." Grayson let out a slow, amused breath before, without warning, he shoved her hard into the filing cabinet. Metal bit into her back as she gasped in pain. He leaned in close, his voice low and poisonous. "Stay in your place, girl." He walked away like nothing had happened, like she was nothing. And in that moment, Naomi felt a rage so deep it could have consumed her. But she wouldn't let it, because she knew something Grayson didn't. His days were numbered. That night, long after the courthouse emptied, Naomi sat at her desk, her fingers skimming through old case files. She had spent months searching for a thread, something that would unravel the corruption that had poisoned Sable Creek for decades. And then she found it. A file tucked away, marked as closed. Marcus Hill, age 16, deceased. She flipped through the pages, her breath catching in her throat. Shot and killed by Captain Ethan Maddox. The report claimed self-defense, that Marcus had been armed, that he had lunged at Maddox during an altercation. But something didn't add up. The autopsy report was missing. The witness statements were redacted. And then there was the crime scene photo. Marcus, lying face down, his hands spread out. Execution style. A cold chill ran down her spine. This was murder, and it had been buried beneath stacks of falsified paperwork. But there was one more thing, one last line at the bottom of the report. Witness, Jada Monroe. Naomi's pulse quickened. She knew that name. Jada Monroe was a local journalist. She had written about police corruption before, until she suddenly stopped. Naomi hadn't seen her in months. Because she was missing. The air in the courthouse felt heavier now. Naomi's hands shook as she gathered the documents, stuffing them into her bag. She had enough to prove Marcus had been murdered. Enough to expose Maddox. But if Jada Monroe was still alive, she had the evidence to destroy them all. Naomi needed to find her. Fast. She barely slept that night, her mind racing with the implications of what she had found. By the time she returned to her apartment, exhaustion had set in, but something felt off. The moment she stepped inside, her stomach twisted. The place was ransacked. Drawers pulled out, papers scattered across the floor, her mattress slashed open. Her bookshelf, once perfectly arranged, was overturned, the pages of legal documents and research torn apart. Her breath came in quick, shallow gasps as she stepped forward, her pulse hammering in her ears. Then she saw it. Carved into her living room wall, deep into the plaster, were 3 words: stop or die. Naomi froze. Her entire body trembled as she stared at the message, the weight of it pressing down on her like an avalanche. She wasn't just being watched. They knew. She had just stepped into a game where the stakes were life or death. And now, she had a choice to make. Walk away, or fight back. Naomi squared her shoulders, fists clenched at her sides. She wasn't going anywhere, because Sable Creek had stolen enough lives. And if she had to burn the whole corrupt system down to get justice, so be it. The weight of injustice is suffocating. Naomi has spent every day walking on a razor's edge, enduring the sneers, the humiliation, the violence, just to bring the truth to light. And now, the enemy knows she's getting too close. Her home has been ransacked, a chilling warning carved into the walls: stop or die. The corruption in Sable Creek isn't just deep, it's ruthless. Do you feel the tension? The rage? The fear? Naomi's fight is just beginning, but the stakes have never been higher. Press 1 to continue her journey, or press 0 if the danger is too great. Naomi sat motionless in the dim glow of her apartment, the words carved into her wall still fresh, taunting her. Stop or die. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, forcing herself to steady her breath. She had expected threats, knew she was playing a dangerous game, but something about seeing those words inside her home, in the place that was supposed to be safe, rattled her in a way nothing else had. Her mind raced. They knew who she was. Or at the very least, they knew she was digging where she shouldn't be. She had 2 choices: back off or push forward. And backing off was never an option. Hours later, Naomi found herself sitting in an unmarked sedan, parked in a secluded alley behind an old convenience store on the outskirts of town. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, eyes scanning the darkness around her, waiting for the one person she still had left to trust. A faint knock on the passenger window made her jump. She turned quickly, her breath catching in her throat, but it was him. The only honest cop in a department drowning in filth. He slid into the seat beside her, looking over his shoulder before pulling his hood up. Even out of uniform, Vasquez moved like a man who knew he was being watched. "You look like hell," he muttered, his voice low. Naomi exhaled a bitter laugh. You should see my apartment. Vasquez didn't ask. He just nodded, jaw tightening. He knew how this town worked. They came after you already, didn't they? He asked. She nodded, swallowing hard. They left me a message. A clear one. Vasquez let out a slow breath and ran a hand over his face. Damn it. He shook his head. You were right, Carter. It's worse than we thought. She turned to him sharply. Tell me everything. Vasquez hesitated, his fingers tapping anxiously against his knee. Then, with a quick glance at the rearview mirror, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small black notebook. This, he said, placing it on the dashboard, is everything I've been able to dig up. Naomi reached for it, flipping through the pages quickly. What she saw made her stomach churn. Names, dates, offshore bank accounts, Sheriff Walter Grayson, Judge Richard Whitmore, Captain Ethan Maddox. They were all there, connected by a tangled web of illegal money transfers, bribes from private prison corporations, and payouts from false convictions. She gritted her teeth. They're selling innocent lives for profit. Vasquez's eyes darkened. That's exactly what they're doing. She shook her head, her pulse racing. This isn't just police corruption. It's an entire criminal operation. Exactly, Vasquez said, rubbing his temples. And anyone who tries to expose it, they end up dead, Naomi finished. A heavy silence settled between them. Then Vasquez reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. This, he said, is the key to bringing them down. Naomi took it, her fingers tightening around the tiny device. What's on it? Financial records, wire transfers, proof that Grayson and Whitmore are getting payouts for every black and brown person they lock up. Naomi's heart pounded. This was it. This was what she needed. But Vasquez wasn't finished. There's something else, he said, voice dropping even lower. Jada Monroe. Naomi stiffened. The journalist? Vasquez nodded. She has something big. Video footage of Marcus Hill's murder. Naomi felt the breath leave her lungs. You're telling me there's proof? Real proof. Undeniable. A hidden security camera caught everything. Where is she? Naomi demanded. Vasquez's face darkened. That's the problem. She's missing. Naomi drove like a woman possessed, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. If Jada had that footage, she was in danger. She reached the last known address Vasquez had given her, a rundown house on the edge of town. The street was dark, the house's windows boarded up. Her heart pounded as she approached the door. She knocked once, then twice. Nothing. She reached for the handle. Unlocked. Pushing the door open, she stepped inside, every muscle tensed. Jada, she called out. A creak from the back of the house made her freeze. Then footsteps. Naomi spun around just as Jada Monroe stumbled into the room, her face pale, her hands shaking. Oh my God, Jada gasped, grabbing Naomi's arm. We have to go. Now. Before Naomi could react, the front door exploded inward. Police officers. Guns raised. Get on the ground. One of them bellowed. It was a setup. Jada's eyes widened in horror. Naomi, run. Without thinking, Naomi grabbed her and bolted toward the back door. Bullets shattered the walls as they ran. Naomi burst through the back, dragging Jada with her, sprinting toward the trees. Police dogs barked behind them. Jada tripped. Naomi yanked her up, adrenaline screaming through her veins. Then, a sharp, painful scream. Naomi turned just in time to see Jada being tackled to the ground by an officer. Jada. The last thing she saw was Jada's terrified face as they dragged her away. Naomi ran. She ran until her lungs burned, until her legs threatened to give out. Only when she was miles away, hidden deep in the woods, did she allow herself to stop. Her pulse pounded in her ears. They had Jada, and Naomi had barely escaped with her life. She pulled her phone from her pocket, hands shaking as she turned it on. One new message. An anonymous number. She opened it, and her stomach twisted. If you want to see her alive, walk away. Attached was a photo. Jada Monroe, tied to a chair. Her face bloodied. Naomi's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. Naomi's mind raced. They had set her up. They had kidnapped Jada. And now they were taunting her. She knew what they wanted. For her to give up. To walk away. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. Naomi Carter wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The tension is unbearable. Naomi is alone, hunted, and running out of time. Jada's life hangs in the balance. The corruption in Sable Creek is worse than anyone imagined, and now Naomi faces an impossible choice. Save Jada or expose the truth. What would you do in her place? Can she outsmart the system before it silences her for good? Let us know what you think. Press 1 if you believe Naomi must keep fighting, or 0 if the risk is too high. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss what happens next. Naomi's hands shook as she stared at the photo on her phone. Jada Monroe, tied to a chair. Bloodied. Helpless. The message beneath it burned in her mind. If you want to see her alive, walk away. She felt a wave of nausea, the walls of the dark woods around her closing in. The wind howled through the trees, but all she could hear was her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. They had taken Jada. They had made their move. Now, she had to make hers. She had 2 options. 1. Go public with everything now. Leak the flash drive. Expose the network of corruption. Force national attention on Sable Creek. But that would mean leaving Jada behind, sacrificing her life for the greater cause. 2. Try to negotiate Jada's release. Risk walking into enemy territory, knowing full well she might never walk out. Naomi squeezed her eyes shut. Jada risked everything for the truth. Could she really just let her die? No, she couldn't. She took a deep breath, shoved her phone into her jacket, and turned toward her car. She had to meet with Judge Whitmore. Naomi walked into the courthouse, her nerves hidden beneath a mask of calm. She had requested a private meeting with Judge Richard Whitmore, knowing full well she was walking into a lion's den. His office smelled of cigar smoke and expensive leather. The walls were lined with books that Naomi was sure he never read. His massive oak desk sat in front of a tall window that overlooked the city, a king surveying his kingdom. Whitmore didn't look surprised to see her. He smirked as he leaned back in his chair, watching her like a cat playing with a mouse. "Ah, Miss Carter," he said, voice dripping with condescension. "I assume you've come to your senses?" Naomi held her chin high. She refused to let him see her fear. "Where is Jada Monroe?" she asked. Whitmore chuckled. "Straight to business. I like that." Naomi's fists clenched. "Where is she?" The judge sighed, shaking his head. "You're making this so much harder than it needs to be." He stood, slowly circling his desk, stopping just inches from her. His cold eyes studied her like she was nothing more than an inconvenience. "Let me explain how this works, Miss Carter," he said, voice calm but full of threat. "You're nothing. A speck. A little girl playing detective in a game far too big for her." Naomi's heart pounded, but she didn't move. Whitmore leaned in, his breath reeking of whiskey. "You walk away now, and maybe, your little journalist friend gets to live." Naomi forced herself to stay still. The rage burned through her veins. "And if I don't?" The judge sighed dramatically and returned to his chair. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick file. He tossed it onto his desk. Naomi didn't have to open it to know what was inside. Her real identity. Her past. Everything. "We know exactly who you are, Agent Carter," Whitmore said smoothly. "And we both know how this ends if you keep pushing." Naomi swallowed hard. Jada was as good as dead. She stormed out of the courthouse, fury and panic clashing in her chest. Jada was gone. She had no way to reach her. Whitmore had all but promised he would kill her anyway. And now Naomi was running out of allies. She pulled out her phone, heart pounding, and dialed the only number she could. Detective Vasquez. It rang, and rang, and then a sharp, clipped voice. "This is the Sable Creek Police Department. May I ask who's calling?" Naomi froze. A sick feeling coiled in her stomach. She hung up, and then she drove. She found Miguel Vasquez's car parked behind an abandoned gas station. Her stomach dropped. Something was wrong. She stepped closer. The driver's side window was shattered. Blood splattered across the dashboard. Her breath caught in her throat. Vasquez sat slumped in the seat, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. No, 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 no. Her knees buckled as she stepped closer, but then a piece of paper pinned to his chest. A single sentence scrawled across it in black ink. One by one, you will fall. Naomi clamped a hand over her mouth, suppressing a scream. Tears burned her eyes. Miguel was dead. Her only ally. Gone. A fresh wave of fear wrapped around her throat, but beneath it, a new rage. They had made their move. Now it was time for hers. Naomi barely had time to process her grief before the flashing lights blinded her. Sirens. The screech of tires. Before she could react, a voice boomed. Step away from the vehicle. Hands up. Naomi turned just in time to see Sheriff Grayson stepping out of his patrol car. He was grinning. The other officers aimed their guns at her. You have got to be kidding me, Naomi muttered, raising her hands. Grayson smirked, taking a slow step toward her. Now, Agent Carter, this doesn't look good for you. Naomi knew exactly what they were doing. They had killed Vasquez. Now, they were framing her for it. They shoved her face first into the patrol car, metal cuffs biting into her wrists. As they drove, Naomi stared out the window, her mind racing. They were closing in. Vasquez was dead. Jada was missing. And now, she was their prisoner. The car pulled into the Sable Creek jail. They dragged her down a dark corridor, past empty cells, deeper into the building than any prisoner ever went. Then, a cold metal door. The guards shoved it open. Inside was a single dark, damp cell. And standing inside, waiting for her, Captain Ethan Maddox. Naomi's blood ran cold. Maddox stepped forward, his smirk widening. Well, he drawled, crossing his arms. This is a sight. Naomi clenched her fists. Where's Jada? Maddox just chuckled. Oh, sweetheart. You really don't get it, do you? He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. I remember your brother. Naomi froze. Maddox's grin widened. I wonder if you'll beg the same way he did before I shot him. Naomi Carter had always known how to endure pain. She had endured it when she was a little girl, watching her mother weep at the kitchen table after another police officer walked free from killing an unarmed black man. She had endured it when she was a teenager, hearing the news that her brother Elijah had been murdered, his body riddled with bullets, his hands in the air when they shot him. She had endured it when she entered Sable Creek as an undercover agent, swallowing the bile in her throat as she let men like Sheriff Grayson and Judge Whitmore look down on her, belittle her, spit on her dignity like she was less than human. But this was a new kind of pain. The kind that cracked something deep inside her. The kind that made her want to burn the entire system to the ground. They dragged her into the courtroom, hands shackled, face bruised, blood dried on her temple. She had barely slept in the freezing cell, her ribs aching from the kicks she had taken to her side the night before. They wanted her broken. They wanted her to kneel. But Naomi walked forward, shoulders back, head high. Her chains rattled as they shoved her into a seat. The courtroom was packed. Cameras lined the back, journalists whispering among themselves, their pens scratching furiously. The whole town had come to watch her fall. At the front of the room, Judge Richard Whitmore sat like a king on his throne. He adjusted his glasses and smirked. Agent Carter, he mused, dragging out the words. Or should I say, the criminal before us today? Laughter rippled through the officers seated in the front row. Sheriff Grayson leaned back in his chair, arms folded smugly. Next to him, Captain Maddox smirked, twirling a pen between his fingers like this was nothing more than entertainment. Naomi's nails dug into her palms. The prosecutor, a man Naomi had never seen before, stepped forward, papers in hand. He adjusted his tie and began speaking in a calm, deliberate tone, like he was reading a bedtime story. Your Honor, the evidence against Miss Carter is overwhelming. He turned to the jury, shaking his head in mock disappointment. A corrupt federal agent, attempting to interfere in local law enforcement, he sighed. And now, she stands accused of the cold-blooded murder of Detective Miguel Vasquez. Naomi's hands curled into fists. She knew this was coming. They had killed Vasquez. Now, they were painting her as the villain. The prosecutor paraded out fake evidence, altered security footage, fabricated witness statements, a false autopsy report. It was all a lie, a carefully crafted, ruthless deception. And Judge Whitmore nodded along approvingly, as if he had already made his decision. Then it happened. The doors to the courtroom burst open. The gallery hushed. All eyes turned. A woman stepped inside, her face bruised, her lips split, but her eyes burning with determination. Jada Monroe. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone cursed under their breath. Judge Whitmore stiffened. Sheriff Grayson's face went ghost white. Captain Maddox bolted upright in his chair. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Jada walked slowly, deliberately, her hand gripping something small, but powerful. A flash drive. She stopped at the prosecution's table and lifted her chin. "Your Honor," she said, her voice hoarse but steady, "I have evidence proving everything." The courtroom erupted. Shouts. Gasps. Murmurs. The judge slammed his gavel down to demand order, but the atmosphere had already shifted. The power had shifted. Jada handed the flash drive to the bailiff, her hands trembling slightly. Judge Whitmore scowled but waved for the evidence to be played. "This better not be a waste of my time," he muttered. The screen flickered to life. And then the room fell silent. The footage was grainy but clear. It showed Marcus Hill, 16 years old, standing with his hands in the air. It showed Captain Maddox raising his gun. It showed Marcus begging for his life. And then the gunshots. Marcus collapsed. Maddox stood over him. And he laughed. The recording continued. The screen cut to secret financial records, offshore accounts linking Sheriff Grayson and Judge Whitmore to private prison corporations. They had been selling innocent lives for profit. And finally, the last clip, a recording of Sheriff Grayson himself. His voice, clear as day. "We'll bury the kid. No cameras. No evidence. Make sure the body disappears." Chaos exploded. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment. Jurors covered their mouths in shock. Spectators shouted in horror. Judge Whitmore's face drained of color. Sheriff Grayson shot to his feet. "Turn that off," he bellowed, but it was too late. Captain Maddox looked around, wild-eyed, realizing just how badly they had lost control. And then he reached for his gun. Naomi saw it a split second before it happened. Maddox lunged for her, his gun drawn, his face twisted with pure rage. She ducked. The sound of a single gunshot rang out. For a moment, she thought she had been hit. But when she looked up, Captain Maddox stood frozen. His eyes widened. Blood bloomed on his chest. And then he collapsed. Behind him, a police officer stood shaking, holding his smoking gun. The room fell into stunned silence. The rest happened in a blur. Sheriff Grayson was ripped from the courtroom in cuffs, screaming about how this wasn't over. Judge Whitmore tried to slip out the back, but reporters swarmed him, shoving microphones in his face. Naomi sat there, breathing heavily, her mind still spinning. It was over. The truth was out. And Sable Creek would never be the same. Hours later, Naomi stood outside the courthouse, the cool night air hitting her skin. She had won. But then her phone buzzed. A blocked number. She hesitated, then answered. Silence. Then a voice. Deep. Calm. Amused. "You think this is over?" Naomi's breath caught in her throat. "We own more than just this town, Agent Carter." A low chuckle. Click. The line went dead. Naomi lowered the phone slowly, her pulse pounding. The war wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Do you feel the tension? The battle in Sable Creek is won, but a greater war looms. Who is pulling the strings behind the curtain? Press 1 if you want Naomi to keep fighting. Press 0 if it's too dangerous. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss what happens next. The sirens wailed through the streets of Sable Creek, the flashing red and blue lights illuminating the once untouchable monsters now being dragged away in shackles. Sheriff Walter Grayson, his face twisted in rage, fought against the officers gripping his arms, but his struggles were useless. He had ruled this town with fear, and now he was drowning in it. "You think this means anything?" he bellowed, his voice hoarse as the cameras flashed. "You think you've won?" Captain Ethan Maddox lay dead in the courtroom. Judge Richard Whitmore, his smugness shattered, kept his head low as he was forced into a police vehicle, avoiding the mob of reporters shouting his name like a curse. The whole town had come to witness the downfall, and Naomi Carter stood among them, watching, breathing, trying to convince herself that this was real. For the first time in decades, Sable Creek felt alive. People had poured into the streets, cheering, hugging, crying, as if a war had ended, as if a weight had been lifted from their backs. Black families, who had lived under the suffocating shadow of injustice for generations, held their children close, whispering promises that maybe, just maybe, things would change. Naomi felt the weight of it all pressing against her chest. This wasn't just a courtroom victory. This was a reckoning. But as she looked at the elated faces, the celebration swirling around her, a dark knot twisted in her gut. Because she knew better. Justice wasn't an ending. It was just another beginning. The night air was cool as Naomi stood on the courthouse steps, the distant sounds of the town still alive with celebration. Her body ached from the bruises, her mind still processing the chaos of the trial. The moment Maddox lunged for her, the gunshot that ended it all. She should have felt relief. But she didn't. She felt watched. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the device before she pulled it out. Blocked number. A cold chill slithered down her spine. She answered. Silence. Then, a voice. Calm, amused, and utterly terrifying. "You think this is over?" Naomi's grip on the phone tightened. "We own more than just this town, Agent Carter." Her breath caught in her throat. A low chuckle. Click. The line went dead. But the silence it left behind was louder than anything Naomi had ever heard. Naomi stood there, the phone still pressed to her ear, even though the call was long gone. The words repeated in her mind. "We own more than just this town." She lifted her gaze, scanning the streets, searching for the unseen threat. And then, she saw him. A figure standing far in the distance, just beyond the glow of the streetlights. Watching her, unmoving, a shadow among shadows. Her heartbeat hammered in her chest. She took a step forward, and just like that, he was gone. Naomi exhaled, slow and steady, forcing herself to push past the fear. She had faced monsters before, and she would face them again. Because Sable Creek wasn't the only town like this. It wasn't the only place where powerful men buried the truth and sold justice to the highest bidder. It wasn't the only place where innocent black lives had been swallowed by a broken system. She had fought a battle, but there was still a war. And Naomi Carter wasn't done fighting. She never would be. She turned back toward the courthouse, the city still buzzing behind her, and took one final look at the night sky. She hadn't won. Not yet. But she would. One town at a time. One truth at a time. Do you feel it? The tension, the danger still lurking in the shadows? Who was watching Naomi? What's the bigger conspiracy? Let us know. Press 1 if you want Naomi to continue her fight, or 0 if she should walk away before it's too late. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss what happens next. Justice is never simple. It's never clean. It's never handed to the people who deserve it most. It's fought for. It's bled for. It's won inch by inch, against forces that would rather see the truth buried than exposed. Naomi Carter's journey wasn't just about one case, one courtroom battle, or one corrupt town. It was about something bigger, something that exists in far too many places, something that people of color have known for generations. The system was never designed to protect us. It was designed to control us, to silence us, to make us afraid. And that fear, that's how they win. That's how people like Sheriff Grayson and Judge Whitmore hold power for decades. That's how corruption thrives. Because they count on us giving up. But Naomi didn't give up. And neither should we. Because change doesn't happen in a single moment. It happens when people refuse to stay silent. When they expose the truth, even when it's dangerous. When they demand justice, even when the odds are stacked against them. When they fight, not just for themselves, but for those who no longer have a voice. Marcus Hill never got justice in his lifetime. But because Naomi fought, because Jada risked everything to reveal the truth, his name will never be forgotten. And that matters. That changes things. Because every victory, even a small one, forces the world to shift. But the question now is, who really owns justice? Naomi may have won the battle in Sable Creek, but her fight isn't over. Because as long as there are powerful men hiding in the shadows, pulling the strings, controlling who gets to walk free and who gets locked away, the war continues. And Naomi? She won't stop. She can't stop. And neither should we. This story isn't just entertainment. It's a mirror. A reminder that we can't afford to look away. The injustices Naomi faced in Sable Creek aren't just fiction, they're real. Maybe not in this exact form, maybe not in one single town, but across the world, in too many places to count. So, what will you do? Will you sit back, watch, and forget? Or will you stand with Naomi? Stand with those who fight every single day to break the cycle of oppression and corruption? If you believe in her fight, show your support. Press 2 to stand with Naomi. Press like if you want justice to win. And most importantly, subscribe, because this fight isn't over, and you won't want to miss what happens next. The truth is a weapon, and Naomi Carter? She's just getting started.